In November 2025, Canada is putting into effect one of the most talked about policy shifts in its immigration system, and it directly affects who can legally stay in the country and who may be ordered to leave. The core of this change lies in how the government is handling temporary residents, asylum seekers, and those who overstay or fail to comply with specific rules. To understand the seriousness of this, it's important to know that Canada already uses three major types of removal orders: a departure order, where you must leave within 30 days, an exclusion order, which bars you from re-entry for a year or even 5 years if misrepresentation is found, and a deportation order, which is essentially permanent unless you get formal permission to return. These orders are not new, but the pace and scope of when they can be issued are about to change. The most significant development is how temporary resident programs are being tightened. For years, Canada's reputation as a welcoming destination for international students, temporary workers, and families has drawn hundreds of thousands of people. But the government has decided to reset the balance. The temporary resident population will be capped so that it makes up no more than 5% of Canada's total population by the end of 2026. That means the clock is ticking. If you are on a study permit or a work visa and your authorization is close to expiring, the margin for error will shrink dramatically. In previous years, overstaying a visa might have led to warnings, extensions, or lengthy appeal processes, but under the revised framework, overstays are expected to result in quicker removal orders with less room for negotiation. Another pillar of the new policy centers on asylum claims. Canada has historically been one of the most generous countries for refugees, but with Bill C-2 and the Strong Borders Act in play, the rules are much tougher. For instance, if you entered Canada after June 24, 2020, and you file an asylum claim more than a year after your arrival, you may be ineligible. Similarly, anyone crossing the U.S. Canada land border outside of a designated entry point and then applying for asylum more than 14 days later could find their claim refused outright. That means thousands of people who might have believed they still had time to prepare their case could suddenly face the possibility of expulsion. The government's argument is that faster processing and strict deadlines will preserve resources for those with the strongest claims. But for individuals caught off guard, it means removal from the country with very little recourse. Finally, there is a major change affecting families. Spouses of international students or temporary workers used to benefit from relatively broad access to open work permits. But the new rules restrict this privilege to only certain academic programs and specific job categories. If your partner is in a short course, a diploma, or an occupation that doesn't meet the criteria, your ability to work in Canada may be revoked. This may not sound like expulsion in itself, but the ripple effect is huge. Once your work authorization ends, your legal status does too, and if you remain, you become subject to a removal order. In short, the policies launching in November 2025 are not only about people who deliberately break rules. They also target those who delay paperwork, choose the wrong type of program, or simply misunderstand the new requirements. The bottom line is simple. Canada is reshaping its immigration landscape, and anyone not paying attention could be forced to leave. One of the most overlooked but critical elements of the November 2025 immigration changes is the reduction in permanent residency admissions. Canada has long been admired for its openness, but the government is recalibrating its approach. The target for 2025 is set at roughly 395,000 permanent residents, a sharp decrease compared to earlier years where the numbers often surpassed 500,000. This isn't just about statistics. It translates into tens of thousands of applications that would have been accepted before now being rejected or delayed. For families waiting years to reunite, for skilled workers planning to settle permanently, and for students transitioning from study permits to permanent residence, the new targets mean fewer opportunities and more competition. The The country's priority is shifting toward balance, making sure the inflow does not overwhelm housing, healthcare, and infrastructure. But what most people don't realize is that these lower admission numbers are paired with strict controls on temporary residents. Canada has been clear that by the end of 2026, temporary residents should account for no more than 5% of the population. To put that into perspective, temporary residents currently make up nearly double that figure. So, the government is preparing to tighten eligibility, shorten timelines, and accelerate removal for those who don't meet renewal conditions. This isn't a symbolic statement. It means real people will be asked to leave, even if they have lived, studied, or worked in Canada for years. What's shocking is that many are unaware of this population cap and assume that extensions will continue to be automatic. They won't. Another major change is in the post-graduation work permit program. For years, Canada's strategy was to attract international students and then give them a pathway into the labor market through the PGWP. Starting in 2025, that program is being recalibrated to fit labor shortages in specific sectors. This means not every graduate will qualify anymore. If you are studying in a field that is oversaturated or not aligned with national priorities, you could finish your degree and find yourself without work rights. That pushes students into an impossible choice: leave Canada immediately or overstay and risk a removal order. It's a quiet but powerful shift, because most students plan their entire futures around the assumption of an open permit. The new framework also narrows access for spouses and dependents. Under earlier rules, spouses of students or temporary workers had broad eligibility for open work permits, but the 2025 rules limit that to specific programs such as doctoral studies or to high-demand occupations. For everyone else, the door closes. Without valid status, these spouses can no longer stay legally, and if they remain, they face removal orders. This creates a ripple effect where families are split, career plans collapse, and long-term stability disappears overnight. Finally, there is the asylum system. Canada is enforcing stricter deadlines that many applicants simply don't anticipate. A 1-year filing limit from the date of entry is non-negotiable. A 14-day rule for irregular border crossers is equally strict. Missing these deadlines can instantly make a person ineligible for protection, regardless of their circumstances. These rules are designed to discourage misuse of the asylum process, but the unintended consequence is that vulnerable individuals who delay out of fear, confusion, or lack of legal advice could be expelled quickly. The November 2025 shift marks the first time Canada has combined reduced permanent residency levels, capped temporary resident numbers, restricted work permits, and stricter asylum eligibility all at once. The combined impact is that thousands will lose pathways to stay, and for many, that means being ordered to leave. One of the most striking realities about the November 2025 changes is how much discretion the government is giving to enforcement agencies like the Canada Border Services Agency. In the past, delays in paperwork or mistakes in applications often gave applicants opportunities to appeal or correct their records. Going forward, there will be far less tolerance. Officers are being instructed to act more quickly when someone's status is invalid, and this will likely increase the number of departure orders issued within weeks rather than months. The intent is to reduce backlogs, but for individuals caught in the middle, it means decisions can be swift and life-changing. For example, an expired work permit that once might have led to a grace period could now be grounds for immediate removal if the extension application is not filed correctly and on time. There is also a new emphasis on misrepresentation, even unintentional. Canada has always taken a strong stance against false information, but the threshold for what counts as misrepresentation is expanding. Small mistakes, like failing to update your address, leaving out part-time jobs, or misunderstanding eligibility requirements, can now trigger exclusion orders lasting up to 5 years. This is not hypothetical. the government has made it clear that part of tightening the system involves discouraging any type of inaccurate filing. In effect, the burden of proof is shifting to the applicant, and errors that once seemed minor could now become grounds for expulsion. Another significant feature is how economic demand will dictate who stays. Canada is realigning immigration policy to focus almost exclusively on labor shortages in priority fields such as healthcare, engineering, and technology. If you fall outside those categories, your ability to transition from temporary status to permanent residency becomes limited. This change is subtle but powerful. It means someone working legally in hospitality or retail, industries that previously absorbed large numbers of temporary workers, may have no future pathway. When their permits expire, renewal is not guaranteed, and without status, removal follows. The rules are designed to funnel skilled labor into sectors that Canada sees as essential, but it leaves a large portion of workers vulnerable. Even humanitarian and compassionate grounds, which used to serve as a safety net for people facing removal, will face greater scrutiny. Applications on these grounds are expected to be processed faster, but approvals will be fewer. Authorities are signaling that humanitarian relief will not serve as a backdoor to permanent residency. That means families citing hardship or children's schooling may not receive the leniency they once did. For those already integrated into Canadian communities, this could feel like the system is suddenly turning its back on them. The strongest message coming from these November changes is that Canada is moving from flexibility to strict enforcement. Reduced quotas, caps on temporary residents, strict deadlines, harsher penalties for misrepresentation, and a labor-focused pathway system all combine to make it clear: anyone who does not fit the new priorities or fails to meet the exact requirements could be removed quickly. It's not just about those deliberately breaking laws. It's about ordinary people who miscalculate, misunderstand, or fail to keep up with the changes. The outcome is the same: a removal order and an end to their stay in Canada. The November 2025 immigration rules close with a reality that is impossible to ignore. Canada is deliberately narrowing its doors, and those who remain unaware risk sudden removal. What ties all these policies together is the government's shift from being reactive to being preemptive. Instead of waiting for cases to build up, enforcement will move faster, targets are lower, and leniency is shrinking. For international students, this means that choosing the wrong program of study or failing to meet new eligibility standards could quietly erase years of planning. For temporary workers, especially in fields not prioritized, the message is blunt: your stay in Canada is conditional, and once your permit ends, you may have no chance to extend. For asylum seekers, deadlines are now strict barriers that separate valid claims from automatic rejection, regardless of circumstances. The cumulative effect is that thousands who once felt secure will find themselves in precarious positions overnight. One of the clearest indicators of this change is how tightly numbers are being managed. Immigration levels plans used to be framed as ambitious targets showing Canada's openness. Now they are limits showing Canada's restraint. Reducing permanent resident admissions, capping temporary residents, restricting family work rights, and aligning work permits only to national labor needs all point to one reality: the system is no longer built to accommodate everyone. Instead, it is designed to filter, prioritize, and exclude. Those who fall outside the criteria, whether by delay, misstep, or simply being in a non-priority sector, will find their legal pathway blocked. And once that pathway ends, the result is not uncertainty but removal. What makes these changes especially challenging is how ordinary the triggers can be. Missing a filing deadline, misunderstanding eligibility, or not knowing that your spouse no longer qualifies for a permit are enough to lose status. Unlike in the past, there is less room for appeal, fewer humanitarian exceptions, and more power in the hands of border authorities to act quickly. This is where most people will be caught off guard. They assume time will be given or that exceptions will be made, But the November 2025 framework is designed to cut those options away. The final lesson is simple. Awareness is now the strongest form of protection. Anyone living, working, or studying in Canada on temporary status must keep track of their deadlines, program eligibility, and policy changes with more care than ever before. Families must double-check the validity of their permits. Students must confirm that their studies align with the new PGWP criteria, and asylum seekers must know the filing timelines down to the day. Missing any of these details could mean the difference between staying and being ordered to leave. The November 2025 reforms are not about small tweaks. They mark a fundamental shift in Canada's approach to immigration. The country is telling the world that while it will still welcome people, it will only do so under stricter rules, tighter numbers, and faster enforcement. For those already in Canada, the message is even sharper. Comply precisely, stay fully informed, or risk expulsion without warning.